Hello, welcome to my first episode of, I don't know, I don't even have a name yet. I just have something to share, and it has to do with beating a belly dance costume. So, here's the base. This is a belt, and it's made for one of my students of the Grace Power Joy Dance Company. She has some fine motor problems, so I'm doing the beadwork for her. This is a belt base, and the way that I've done this is to do the appliques separately and then attach them. And the reason that I do them that way is because the first costume that I made, I did all of the beading right on top of the base, and because I was new at this kind of beading, I had to undo probably at least 50% of it. So it beat up the base a little bit, and I found that it doesn't add a lot of time. It's not much more time, it's not much more labor to just make separate appliques and then stitch them together when they're done. So I'm a little bit laid up. I have a herniated lumbar disc, and today I'm finding out I have a cold. So here's how it's going. Here's how I'm spending my time. I miss dancing. I can't wait to feel better, but just give you one good look at it, and then we'll get going. So remove these out of the way, give you a nice look at what is going on with this belt, and we'll get started. So I use scraps. This is a medium weight interface, and it's just scraps. And then this is the same fabric as the costume. So I lay some of the fabric onto the costume. I'm going to lay it this way because I'll have less trailing stuff to get in my way. So I can overlap the fabric by about a 1/4 inch because I trim away the interfacing and then roll it over when I stitch it onto the costume. So the interfacing can be a little bit smaller than the piece of fabric that I need. So I'm going to nudge it up there so I can use the corner. These are just scraps. And I start with my needle and thread. So this is the needle that I like. It's not a beading needle per se, but it is thin enough, the number 9, that it will go through the hole in the bead. And I like them because they're sharp. They're like short little sports cars that I can just maneuver right through and do the beadwork. So I'll put a link to those special needles that I like. I don't like beading needles because they're usually really long and not very maneuverable because of the length, and too flexible, so I have trouble getting them through. So I start with the crystal, and I'm a big believer in high quality crystals. If you're going to do the labor and go to the trouble of beading a project, use quality crystals. Cheap crystals just look milky and nasty, and I have a fun story about crystals, about other people who have been converted to high quality crystals. So these are Swarovski crystals. So to get started, I have my needle and my thread, and I come up right to the side of the tip of the crystal. Pull it up on the outside of the crystal and down through the hole. The reason that I do that is because it's easier to aim for the outside. You can feel the outline of the crystal with the tip of the needle from underneath the fabric. So it's easy to just find that edge up through the bottom and down through the hole. So up, down, up, down, up, down, 3 or 4 times with doubled thread. Okay, so there I've done 3 loops with doubled thread, and now the top tip of the crystal is secured to the layer of fabric and interfacing. So I'm just going to shift my fingers a little bit so I'm holding the top of the crystal and come up through the bottom. My needle came up through the hole. I'm just going to go with that. It's perfectly fine. So I'm going to come down on the outside just because without trying. I came up through the inside of the hole, but here I am on the outside of the crystal, down through the hole, making sure I don't have fabric folded underneath and that my interface is not doubled underneath. Up and then down through the hole. So there it is. Now I turn it over and I'm going to knot this thread. So I pick up a few strands of the weave of the interfacing and I go around the thread. I get this nice line of thread running the length of the crystal. Okay, so I've just made that tiny little stitch and I have this loop of the two threads because it's a doubled thread, and then I just pull it through there. So I do the same thing again. Pick up just a couple strands of the interfacing weave and go around this line of thread. And there's my loop, and I come around through the back side, give it a nice tug, and it's a nice strong knot. And then I take my little scissors and I clip one strand of the thread only one strand of the thread. So now I'm going to work with a single thread. This is a good time to just tell you about the thread that I use. This is upholstery thread. I'll put a link to that. I'm really happy with this thread. It's nice and strong. It's not going to get beat up by the beads, even if it's on a wiggling strand like a piece of fringe or a great loop. I also like tapestry thread, or button and craft thread is also a good one, but this is strong, yet it'll still fit through the center of the bead. That can be, not every thread, not every material is going to be bead friendly, especially if you're working with seed beads. So to start the beading, come up through the base, right on the outside of the crystal, right at the base of the bottom. And then here I have a little tray of seed beads. Sometimes I work with them just on a pile on my counter. This time they're in just a plastic food lid, and that contains things nicely. So I put 3 seed beads onto my thread, and then I take my strand of sequin trim and I lay it on the bottom. And this part it can be a little bit tricky because the sequins want to slide off of the little ropey thread that keeps it in a woven line of trim. So I try to be pretty careful as I do this part. But I'm going to go down through the top hole of the sequin. See, it's trying to wiggle off there. Now note that I don't have the sequin snugged up next to the bead. There's a little bit of space so that the seed beads get a chance to lie flat. I want them to lie nice and flat. It's not good when your beads loop up over in an arc like that. You want them nice and flat, and then they're less likely to snag and the costume will wear better. So I bring my needle up right in that little crotch between the seed beads and the crystal, nice and close to that first bead of the 3 beads. And I'm going to pick up 3 beads again. Okay, 1, 2, 3. The seed beads do vary in size, so if they're really small, I'll go ahead and pick up 4. I nudge that sequin a little bit to the outside because I want space. These Swarovski crystals, they're more expensive, and so I want these seed beads to catch more light and give a nice big frame around that feature crystal, and it economizes my project slightly because I didn't splurge and spend money for big crystals. So I'm trying to maximize the lower cost of the small crystals. So now I'm going to put this on in a nice wide base and then taper it up to the top. So I'll have more seed beads at the bottom, which will be great. They'll make this little crystal look bigger, just giving it a big frame. So to fill in that space, I'm going to use 4 seed beads. 1, 2, 3, 4. Picking up 4 seed beads. And that will fill up space to give a nice wide pear-shaped base. I want a nice fat bottom on this applique. Okay, coming up again, right in the crotch, right next to that first bead. I want to keep it nice and snug. Not right next to the, not too close to the crystal, because then it kind of pops up and doesn't lie as flat and neat looking. 1, 2, 3, 4. Going with 4 beads. Okay, and I'm going to start tapering in that bottom with the sequin trim. If you can see, just starting to pull it in a little bit toward the top. Okay, enough space that the seed beads will lie nice and flat. Okay, and bringing the thread up right next to that first bead. Because I'm tapering in, it's time to scale back down to 3 beads. If I'd picked up really tiny beads, because the seed beads do vary in size, I would pick up 4 instead of 3, because I'm still a little bit wide here, but I can just pull this right in next to that crystal and go down through the hole of the sequin with my needle and 3 beads. So now I have 5 beads there. So it's time to knot it off so that if something does happen, I don't have to repair the whole applique. So we'll do that again. I'm just picking up a couple of the woven threads of the losing my words here. And around the back through the loop there. Pull it a little bit snug, and I'm ready to just keep going around this crystal. So bring the thread up right next to the first bead. There we go. I need to untangle some of that thread that I have. Pick up 3 beads. 1, 2, 3. And bring it in, tapering at the top, nice and close to that crystal. Okay, 3 beads again. Down through the top hole, nice and close to that crystal. Now I'm ready to do an exciting peak to the top. Same principle as when I did the nice fat bottom at the base of the crystal. I want to lengthen the tip of this and give it a nice kind of a paisley shaped, nice little mountainy peak at the top. So I'm going to pick up 4 beads to maximize the height of that peak at the tip of the crystal. 4 beads. Bring it in toward the center, down through the top. Hope that showed up. Okay, so it's a little bit tall, and I'm going to do one more. Bringing the thread up nice and close to the first bead. This time I'm going to pick up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seed beads on my needle. Goes into the next crystal, right in the center, right up tall by the center. Give it a little stretch there. 5 beads will fit in there just fine. It's lying nice and flat, and I'm going to knot it off again. Wiggle it around that interfacing. One more knot there. And I'm going to return the thread to the base of the crystal. So I like things to look a little bit neat, so I'm going to burrow it underneath. I can clip these threads beyond the knot. Okay, so now looking at the front of the crystal, the front of the applique, I'm going to bring my needle up right at the base, right next to where I started. I like to go from top to bottom because I have a little more control over the shape that the sequins will have that way. I find it a little easier to keep symmetry doing it that way. I'm going to pick up 3 beads because I'm back at the base. And I want this to lay the same way. A nice peak at the top and round it out to be nice and fat at the bottom. So I'm going to put this sequin, just hold it with my thumb. If you can see my placement of that, there's a little bit of space between the base of the crystal and the sequin that I'm aiming for here. Just 3 beads worth, just so that the beads will lay flat. If I'd laid it right next to the crystal, I get a puff, and that's not good because that means it's a piece that sticks out and could catch. But because I left a little bit of space, those 3 beads are lying nice and flat. I'm coming up right next to that first bead, and I could pick up 3 or 4 crystals there because I'm starting to spread out the base of the applique. There we go. I'm going to go for 3 because those are kind of big beads. Just right next to that first sequin. Now I'm really starting to spread out the base. So bring the needle up right next to the first bead. I'm going to pick up 4 beads. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and I'll use the tip of my needle to push that sequin out to get a nice wide base. This is what's going to make my little tiny, less expensive Swarovski crystal. It's going to frame it and make it look a lot more fantastic and expensive, even though I'm using the humble little seed bead. So 4 seed beads again on my needle. Push it out, down through the center hole of the sequin. And it's time to knot it off in the back. 4 or 5 go-rounds so that if it does snag and some beads break, I don't have to re-bead the whole piece. I should just be able to re-bead 3 or 4 little sequins worth of beads. Okay, so I'm still spacing out pretty well. I'll do 4 beads if they're smaller, 3 beads if they're bigger, because I'm ready to start tapering in. Pretty small beads here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like I have 3 smallish beads and 1 bigger bead. Just starting to taper that sequin in closer to the center. Up there. 3 more beads. Almost finished. Home stretch here. Down through that sequin. Couple more. Three beads right next to the crystal. I'm going to finish this just in time. My thread's getting short. And this last one, because I'm stretching up to the peak, I'm going to use 4 beads to finish it. 1, 2, 3, 4 beads. Nice and close. So I've brought that close in to give it a nice tall peak at the end, and then I knot off the thread. Okay, so same thing. Picking up a couple of little threads of the interfacing, wrapping around the thread. Needle comes through the loop one more time, through the back of the thread, around behind, through the loop, and I like to tuck the end of my thread in underneath. There we go, and I can just pull it right off, give it a clip. Now I'm ready to trim it up. So I do this very carefully because I don't want to cut the fabric and I don't want to clip any of my threads. But I trim the interfacing all the way around. Okay, so I've done that very carefully. I didn't clip any of the threads and I didn't clip any of the fabric. And then I cut the thread that chains the sequins together, just slipping the scissors right in between. Clip that. That's what I need to be careful of. I have clipped the thread of the beads and had to redo a few beads. I'm just trimming about a 1/4 inch border around here. It doesn't need to be very much, because when I stitch the applique onto the costume base, it's pretty easy for fingers to just turn the fabric under as you stitch it on.